This is the kind of video Washington fears because it doesn't fit the script. Not a border crossing, not a cartel headline, a U.S. citizen, an ICU nurse, shot in Minneapolis during a federal immigration operation. And within hours, the story became a political flashpoint for the Trump administration's crackdown. Because officials framed it one way, and video evidence pushed the public in another direction. Reuters reported the White House defended the enforcement strategy while saying President Trump does not want people killed on U.S. streets. The Associated Press reported the Minneapolis shooting was the sixth death tied to this broader immigration crackdown, and that the most recent fatality involved Alex Pretti, 37, an ICU nurse and U.S. citizen. So tonight we're going to do what the internet cannot do in 30 seconds. We're going to slow down. We're going to separate verified reporting from political spin. We're going to map the incentives driving every major actor in this story: the White House, DHS, local leaders, and even Republicans calling for an investigation. And then we'll answer the question the administration is trying to outrun. Is this a one-off tragedy, or the predictable collision between an aggressive enforcement surge and a public that's watching it unfold in real time? This is analysis based on public reporting from major outlets, official statements, and publicly described video evidence. When I state facts, I'll attribute them. When I interpret strategy, I'll label it as analysis. Here's what's been reported by major outlets. Associated Press reported that Alex Pretti, a 37-year-old nurse and U.S. citizen, was shot and killed in Minneapolis by a federal officer during an immigration crackdown. AP also reported this was the sixth death tied to this broader crackdown, listing other incidents that occurred during enforcement encounters. Reuters reported the White House defended the crackdown after the Minnesota shooting. The White House press secretary said Trump does not want violence on U.S. streets, while emphasizing a commitment to deporting what the administration describes as violent criminals. Reuters also reported that while the administration claimed self-defense, video appears to show Pretti holding a phone when approached. Reuters noted a firearm was later found on his person, but was not seen drawn in the video described. PBS published a White House briefing segment where the press secretary addressed the shooting and again emphasized the administration's enforcement posture. And Time reported Republicans themselves were calling for investigation after what one lawmaker described as a horrifying situation, while still expressing support for immigration enforcement funding. Finally, ABC News reported President Trump said he would send border czar Tom Homan to Minnesota, and that the White House distanced itself from provocative claims made by DHS leadership in the immediate aftermath. That's the fact layer: a fatal shooting, conflicting narratives, public video, a White House defense, and visible political blowback, including from some Republicans. Now, why did this story become gasoline? Because the administration's preferred frame is simple: we are removing dangerous criminals. But the video-driven public frame is different. Why did a man with a phone end up dead? And once the public frame takes hold, you get three rapid consequences. First, protests. Second, demands for investigation. Third, pressure on the White House to prove its claims with evidence, not just rhetoric. Reuters described the core contradiction: official claims of threat, while video appears to show a phone in the subject's hand. AP reported Minnesota officials criticized what they called a misleading portrayal of the victim. And this is the strategic problem for Trump. In immigration politics, he thrives on clear villains. But this story doesn't offer an easy villain. It offers a question. And questions are dangerous because they invite oversight. Let's map the incentives. Player one, the White House. The administration wants to maintain a message of strength, control, and deterrence. If the crackdown looks too aggressive, it risks alienating swing voters and energizing opposition. If it looks too soft, it risks backlash from Trump's base. So the White House chooses a two-track message, as Reuters described: publicly express regret about violence, while doubling down on enforcement and shifting blame to Democratic leaders in Minnesota for non-cooperation. Player 2, DHS, and enforcement agencies. They have an institutional incentive to justify force as lawful and necessary, especially when cameras are involved. When a death occurs, agencies tend to frame events in a way that protects officers and preserves operational legitimacy. Player 3, Minnesota leadership, the governor and local officials. They face public outrage on the ground, and they need to demonstrate they are protecting residents, preserving civil order, and demanding accountability. Player 4, congressional Republicans. Some want to protect ICE and the crackdown. But others, particularly those thinking about swing districts, want to show they support law enforcement while still demanding core values and investigations. Times reporting captures that balancing act. Support funding, but call the incident horrifying and call for investigation. And then there's the wild card, public trust. Once public trust collapses, everything becomes harder. Enforcement, local cooperation, even jury trials if cases arise. Now let's talk about Tom Homan. ABC reported Trump said he would send Homan to Minnesota. This move is not just operational, it's political theater and risk management. In Trump world, Homan is a symbol. He signals, we are not backing down. But sending the symbol to the scene also raises the stakes. If you send your hardline enforcer, the public expects more enforcement, not less. And if the administration then scales back, critics say it's retreat. If it escalates, critics say it's intimidation. So why do it anyway? Because the White House is trying to regain narrative control. When local leaders and viral video dominate the story, Washington sends a decider to reassert command. But there's another layer. Homan's visit also pressures local officials to cooperate in a very public way. That sets up a political fork. If local leaders resist, the White House blames them. If they cooperate, the White House claims victory. Either way, the White House tries to win the storyline. Here's why this is risky for Trump. Trump's immigration brand is built on a promise: order will be restored. But when enforcement produces visible chaos, street confrontations, violent incidents, conflicting claims, it can look less like order and more like volatility. Reuters reported the White House tried to hold both ideas at once. We don't want violence, and we're pushing deportations. That's a tightrope. And the tightrope gets tighter because AP's reporting expands the frame. This is not only one death, it's part of a series of fatal incidents linked to enforcement operations. When stories stack, a pattern forms. And once a pattern forms, the next incident becomes instantly political, because people no longer treat it as random. Now, what does accountability actually mean in a story like this? Mainstream answer: process. Independent review of the incident. Release of body cam and operational footage if it exists. Transparent timelines. Clear rules of engagement and de-escalation policy. Also, oversight. Time reported Republicans calling for investigation. That matters because bipartisan oversight changes the political math. When only Democrats demand investigations, the White House can dismiss it as partisan. When Republicans join, it becomes harder. And here is the key point. The administration may win the short-term messaging battle, but lose the long-term legitimacy war if the evidence looks inconsistent with public statements. Let's be honest, this story is now two competing narratives. Narrative A, the White House narrative. We are targeting dangerous, criminal, illegal aliens. Violence is tragic. Blame local leaders for non-cooperation. Reuters reported the press secretary argued Minnesota leaders' resistance contributed and called for abolishing sanctuary-style protections. Narrative B, the opposition narrative. This is an aggressive surge that's producing deadly outcomes and misleading public claims. AP reported Minnesota officials criticized what they called a misleading portrayal of Pretti. Both sides know a simple truth. Most voters won't read the policy memos. They will remember the image, phone versus gun. So the political battle becomes who owns the image? Who explains the image? Who is seen as telling the truth? Scenario 1. The containment scenario. The White House maintains enforcement but quiets the surge. Fewer visible street confrontations, more behind-the-scenes operations. This reduces viral footage risk but keeps deportation numbers moving. Scenario 2, the escalation scenario. The White House doubles down. Homan's presence signals stronger push, and Minnesota becomes a symbolic battleground. That energizes Trump's base, but risks national backlash and legal pushback. Scenario 3, the oversight scenario. Bipartisan pressure for investigation increases, more footage is released, and the administration's messaging is forced to adapt to whatever the evidence shows. Which is most likely? Right now, the White House's public line from Reuters suggests it wants containment without retreat. Condemn street violence, keep deportation strategy, and redirect blame. But the presence of Republican calls for investigation, as Time reported, increases the chance of oversight. So watch these signals. 1. Do Republicans in Congress demand documents, briefings, or hearings? 2. Does DHS release more footage or details, and do they match what witnesses saw? 3. Does the administration change tactics in Minneapolis to reduce visible confrontations? Here is the takeaway. Trump built his modern political identity on immigration enforcement. But enforcement that looks uncontrolled can become a political liability, fast. The Alex Pretti shooting is now a test of two things. First, can the administration prove its claims with transparent evidence? Second, can Trump keep the law and order brand while videos of street confrontations reshape public perception? Because in 2026, the camera is always rolling, and the public doesn't just want force. They want legitimacy,